Welcome back to NY Flight Jets Talk. In this video, we are joined by Jets ESPN writer, Mr. Rich Cimini. Mr. Cimini, how are you doing today?
Hey, Connor, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. First time on the show, hopefully not the last. So great to have you. We all love listening to you on the Flight Deck podcast.
Thank you.
Incredible. All of my listeners love Flight Deck. So
Thank
let's get right into it. Who do you think are the top five guys the Jets will look to target in free agency this coming off season?
That's a great question to start off with, Connor. I think offensive linemen are going to be a huge priority for the Jets. There's a couple of tackles. Andrews Pete from New Orleans Saints, I think, was a guy to keep an eye on. Even Tyron Smith from Dallas. He's a little older. He's had some injury issues in the past, but he's a great player when he's healthy. I think he'd be a guy to keep an eye on. The center from Tennessee is a really good player. I'd keep an eye out on him. The Jets have that Tennessee connection with Todd Downing, their passing game coordinator. So always look out for Tennessee guys. And I think wide receiver is going to be a really important, position for them. Everyone's speculated on Davante Adams. I think those chances of trading for him are kind of slim now. I think a better guy, certainly Mike Evans would be a guy to watch for, but I think he'll probably end up going back to Tampa. Michael Pittman from Indianapolis is a player to watch. T. Higgins from Cincinnati. And I don't think we can entirely rule out Odell Beckham Jr. We know how much Rodgers likes him, and Aaron Rodgers has a tendency of getting what he likes. So that's another guy to keep an eye out for.
I agree. I think tackles are priority. You name some: Tyron Smith, Andres Pete. I personally, not a lot of people are. I'm big on Jonah Williams. I really like Jonah Williams. I think he's a solid tackle. But the Bengals, they have Tyler Boyd, Jonah Williams, and T. Higgins coming up in free agency. They're going to tag one of them. I think T. Higgins might be tagged, but T. Higgins is my number one option for that wide receiver 2 spot. 25 years old, solid receiver. I could see maybe 5 years, $85-90 million. Mike Evans, I think, is incredible. Davante Adams, 31 years old, looking at 3 years, $95 million. Not too big on Davante Adams, but we need to fill that wide receiver 2 hole. And speaking of Davante Adams, that leads me to my next question. If we were to explore a Davante Adams trade, what do you think the trade would look like?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it is a lot of money. You just mentioned the money figures there. I do believe there's only 17 million guaranteed for the upcoming season. After that, nothing's guaranteed. So I think if they were to do a Davante Adams trade, they would restructure his contract to make it more palatable for the Jets. As for compensation, what they'd have to give up, I don't think it would be what the Raiders had to give up to get him from the Packers a couple of years ago, because like you said, Connor, he's 31 years old now, but he is still a very good receiver. And I think if you put him with Aaron Rodgers, you could see something special there. I would think they would probably have to give up at least a second round pick and probably something like a 2 and a 3. We know, of course, they don't have a second round pick in this year's draft because that was sent to Green Bay as part of the Rodgers trade. So it might be a future 2 and say a 3 this year and a 2 next year. The compensation will be significant. They're not going to be able to get him for a song and a dance, that's for sure. And plus, I think that trade, the odds are probably a little lower now that Antonio Pierce is the full-time coach in Las Vegas. I think Davante developed a real strong affinity for him, and he campaigned for him publicly. So I think it would look kind of weird if he turned around and demanded to be traded. That doesn't mean the Raiders can't trade him. They may decide to go into a rebuilding mode, and they could trade Davante Adams for those picks we talked about and then use those picks to try to trade up for a quarterback. This is all possible. This is what teams are discussing right now. So there's no clear-cut, answers right now. But they would have to give up a lot to get a Davante Adams.
I totally agree. I feel like Jets fans have been trying to kind of share mock trades on Twitter that are kind of like trying to tiptoe like 2/3 for Devontae Adams. Like, in my opinion, there's no way the Raiders would accept a trade that included 2/3 from the New York Jets to send over Devontae Adams. I mean, if you look at Devontae Adams' numbers, Garrett Wilson's very talented wide receiver, but Devontae Adams with Aiden O'Connell and Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterbacks still led Garrett Wilson in every category. I know we're gonna say he's old, but he still led Garrett in those categories. Not too big on the guy, but you still have to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
Old, but a very talented wide receiver.
Yeah, I don't think 31 is super old. Certainly, you're getting into that territory where,
Yeah.
some players just fall off a cliff at some point. But he, from what I understand, keeps himself in phenomenal shape. I don't think he's a guy who relies on speed only, which is good for an older receiver. I think he's just so smart and so crafty running routes. And if he were to come to the Jets, I think he would have such an unbelievable rapport with Aaron Rodgers that they would do things, like on those back shoulder throws.
Yeah.
They just have a rare chemistry. And I think if they were to get him, I think he would be a very good player for at least a year. Now, the question is, can you get the same kind of player in free agency where you don't have to give up the draft pick compensation? I think T. Higgins is a very similar player. I think Michael Pittman is also a very similar player. But these guys, are they going to be free agents, or they could get re-signed by their teams or get tagged? These are things we don't know at this point. But you could also draft a receiver as well. I think there's also a pretty good chance the Jets could go with that first round pick. If they don't get a tackle, they could draft a wide receiver.
I agree. I mean, some of these guys might get re-signed. And speaking of drafting a wide receiver, that leads me to my next question. Who are your top 5 guys for the Jets to target in this draft class?
Well, I mean, the top 3, I'm not sure they would get a shot. I mean, certainly if Marvin Harrison were there, you would take him. There's no chance he gets to the 10th pick. He'll probably be picked 3rd or 4th. Malik Neighbors from LSU is an outstanding prospect. I think if you put him with the Garrett Wilson, man, you are talking about 2 really explosive players. But there's a really good chance he will be picked before 10th as well. Rome Odunze from Washington, a bigger type receiver. I think he's 6'3" or 6'4". Again, would be a very good value at 10, but there's a chance he might be gone. Chance he might be there as well, maybe 50-50. So if it comes down to a choice between Rome or Olu Fashanu, the tackle from Penn State, I think they would probably go with the offensive tackle. I think offensive line is a number 1 priority for the Jets.
I think Olu Fashanu, in my opinion, is most talented player for the Jets to target in this draft. If he's available, 100% take him. I like what you said about the wide receivers there. Malik Neighbors, the only thing that scares me a little is his size profile. Other than that, he's a solid red zone target. One guy I like, who I think would be a bit of a reach where the Jets are sitting, but who's a talented wide receiver, is Keon Coleman out of Florida State. 6'4", huge guy. I think very, very solid wide receiver. But I don't see the Jets reaching on him at that 10th.
Yeah, he's probably more of a middle of the first round type guy. That size would be very intriguing for the Jets. I mean, they thought they were getting that guy with Allen Lazard, who's about 6'4" or 6'5", but as we all know, he hasn't really panned out. He'll get another chance this year before they move on from him. But, I think the Jets also could trade down from 10. And I know that's not a sexy thing to do, but if you look at it, they could trade down, possibly pick up that 2nd round pick that they traded away. So you recoup your 2nd round pick. And there are a couple of tackles that you could get in the middle of the 1st round. The kid from Oregon State, the kid from Oklahoma could be there. So the Jets could possibly trade down, get a 2nd round pick, and still get an offensive tackle in the middle of the 1st round, which would be a very kind of like a win-win scenario.
I can totally see them trading down.
That's something you definitely want to watch for. If little rumblings we hear, from covering the team, that's something you definitely want to write down and keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree. I think Fawaga is going to be available in the middle picks. I think
Yes.
I can see us trading back to fit that 15, 18 area. I can definitely see as I think Fawaga will be available there. And then like as you touched on with Alan Lazard comparing him size to Keon Coleman, that leads me to what I was going to ask you next.
Mhm.
With the draft and off season, where do you see Alan Lazard being located on the 2024-2025 depth chart?
He'll be on the team. He's due to make 10 million. It's fully guaranteed. So there's no way the Jets are going to cut him because the cap ramifications would be massive. I think it would be $18 million or something they would get stuck with. They don't want to do that, obviously. And there's no one who would trade for him. He's coming off one of the worst statistical seasons that a wide receiver's had in the last few years. So there's no chance of doing that. So what the Jets want to do and what they will do is they're going to try to rebuild this guy's confidence. Aaron Rodgers said that he's going to make it one of his pet projects in the offseason is to try to rebuild Lazard's confidence. I think he lost his confidence. I think not having Rodgers out there hurt him in a way. I just think he needs to play with a greater sense of urgency, some more fire. The coaches want to see him recapture that passion that he had back in his days with the Packers that allowed him to come up as an undrafted free agent and moved up through the ranks. He didn't have that last year. He didn't have that fire, that urgency, and the coaches want to see that.
I agree. I just don't think Alan Lazard's a wide receiver too. I mean, if you look at his film from Green Bay, you don't really need to be a film expert to look at it and say he's just not a wide receiver too. Sure, he can be a 3-4 guy you look to, but he's not a wide receiver too. That's the only way to put it.
Yeah, he only had 750 something yards last year. That was his best year in Green Bay. I think a lot of that was the Rodgers factor. He's does drop the ball in training camp. I saw him with a bunch of drops in training camp. He doesn't win as many 50-50 balls as he should for a guy that size. So that's a little bit concerning. He's not a great route runner. He could be a little sharper in and out of his cuts. He is a good blocker, and that's important in the Jets scheme. I know they talked him up as a blocker when they signed him, but as it stands right now, 4 years, 44 million was just a gross miscalculation by the Jets. I think they overpaid for him.
I agree. Overpaid 100%. Two more things before we let you go, Mr. Cimini. Do you think the Jets will tag Bryce Huff, extend him, or let him walk in free agency?
I think they will try to extend him, Connor. I know some folks are speculating that they could tag him. Based on the conversations I've had with people who know this stuff better than I do, it's probably going to be about $23 million to tag a defensive end for the up. That's a projection at this point, but it's probably pretty close. So I think Bryce Huff is a terrific player, 10 sacks. I think he finished first among edge rushers in pressure percentage. He was really good rushing the passer on second and third down. Probably not an every down defensive lineman. He played only 42% of the snaps. And if you look at the last 5 years, of all the defensive players who got the franchise tag, not one of them played fewer than 72% of the snaps for their team that year. So that's why when you look at everything, I don't think the Jets are going to commit $23 million on a tag to Bryce Huff. However, I do think they will try very hard to sign him. From what I gather, I think you're probably looking at something in the 13 to 15 million a year range. Obviously, he's looking for more. That's how it goes. It's a negotiation. You try to find a common ground. I think he would be a good player for the Jets to keep. They developed him. They got him for nothing, basically, undrafted out of college. It's a great success story. Those are the kind of guys you want to keep. However, they did draft Jermaine Johnson in the first round. They drafted Will McDonald in the first round. They still have JFM. However, even with that, I think they will make a strong, spirited effort to try to keep Bryce Huff. The question is whether they're going to reach his number. I know from talking to Bryce Huff, he really wants to play every down. He wants to expand his playing time. I don't think he's going to get that opportunity with the Jets just because of the way they rotate their linemen. So I think that one is going to go right up until the deadline in free agency and whether they keep him or not. And it's really too close to call right now.
I agree. I think the Jets are going to try really hard to extend him. Homegrown kid, undrafted free agent. In my opinion, Joe Douglas's best sign, him and Quincy being off waivers. But you heard it after the Patriots game in that press conference. He's going to go to whoever pays him the most money. I'm all for extending Bryce Huff, but we're not going to overpay for him. My opinion, we should pay him what we think he's worth. And if he says no, he says no. I don't really want to overpay for Bryce Huff. He's very talented, especially on the pass. I think he could be better against the run, as he said. He knows he could be better against the run. He had success against the run in college. But I think Bryce Huff, one of Joe Douglas's best finds, great player. But we have that rotation of defensive linemen. And like I said, not for overpaying him. And to wrap things up, we're going to go over to the coaching staff. Do you see any possibility of a John Gruden type guy or someone senior being added to this offensive staff?
Well, that's an interesting thought because Nathaniel Hackett has some Gruden. In the coaching business, there's so many connections and guys are tied to one another and so-and-so's coaching tree. I know Nathaniel and his father, Paul Hackett, the former Jet offensive coordinator, especially Paul, he did work with Gruden in Tampa Bay. So there is that family connection. I don't think it'll be John Gruden. I don't think the Jets are going to go down that road. I think they're going to run it back with Nathaniel Hackett. They're going to have Todd Downing as their passing game coordinator. I do think they are, Robert Saleh, very quietly looking into other position coaches. You've heard Deuce Staley's name mentioned. A guy, I think a TJ Yates from Atlanta has drawn some interest from the Jets, probably more as a wide receivers coach. Another guy, Tony Dews from Tennessee, who's like a running back coach, but he's also a tight ends coach. He's done both. So I think Robert Saleh is very quietly looking at some position coaches. I don't think he's going to bring in like you described, Connor, as like a senior voice into the coach's room. If he did, not necessarily a bad idea. I think, hey, look, their offense was terrible last year. I mean, they were pretty much bottom of the barrel in most of the major categories. So anytime you could get a new pair of eyes in there to look, get a different perspective on things, I think that would be a good idea. I just don't think John Gruden would be probably the right idea. But I think you might be onto something. But I do think they will have some changes on that offensive staff. A lot of contracts are going to be expiring in the next couple of weeks. And so I do think you might see a change or two on the offensive staff.
I agree. I threw John Gruden in there. I could see maybe possibility of Jay Gruden just because I didn't even think of the family connection. What I thought of is Hackett and the Gruden family both run that West Coast kind of offense. So that's why John Gruden came to mind for me. I think possibility of someone senior coming is, I think there's a chance. Like you said, Tony Dews was interviewed today. I think Ron Middleton stays as the tight end coach.
Yeah, I think he'll probably stay too. I think they might be looking for a running back coach. When you say West Coast offense, by the way, Connor, I think I'd refer to it as like the Rodgers Coast offense. I think it's Aaron Rodgers offense. I think it's built off the West Coast principles, and certainly Nathaniel Hackett is a West Coast. He grew up with that basically from the time he was probably crawling as a infant from his father, taught him the West Coast offense. But right now, I think it's more of a Rodgers Coast offense.
I agree. Mr. Cimini, thank you so much for joining me. Any final thoughts?
No, I really appreciate you having me. Those were great questions. You hit on all the major issues, and we'll see how it goes. It'll be an interesting offseason. It won't be as interesting as last offseason because we had the whole Rodgers trade. But every Jet offseason is always an interesting journey unto itself.
Totally agree. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. JET.